Abuse and vitriol from a small sector of the public has become so intense, Labor is considering axing its public walkabouts on next year's election campaign. The Deputy Prime Minister has revealed he needed to engage a security detail, usually only reserved for the Prime Minister, to attend a recent public meeting. Political editor Jenna Lynch reports.
This was peak Jacinda mania. A hyped-up electorate in 2020 could not get enough. Next year will not be the same.
We are going to have to think about this election campaign in a slightly different way.
Because peaking at the parliamentary protest, politicians are increasingly the target of abuse and threats.
It seems to have a different, more violent nature.
Recently, the Deputy Prime Minister took the unusual step of taking the Prime Minister's security detail, the DPS, with him to an event in Northland where these protesters, paired with Lamingtons,
that's a little treat for Mr Robinson, is it? Yeah?
disrupted Robertson's meetings,
Democracy in action.
followed him to a hotel, even blockaded the airport. Newshub understands Robertson needed to be driven onto the tarmac and board directly from there.
Screaming and yelling at me that I was a paedophile and various other revolting things. Those sorts of experiences are not great, and DPS were there to protect me, but they can't possibly be there to protect all politicians.
Labor is currently considering how it can campaign differently at next year's election, potentially scrapping the famous walkabout.
The environment out there on the ground has changed.
Can't let these people win, so we've got to make sure that we still campaign. We've got to think a bit differently.
National, however, full walkabout ahead.
Opportunities for the public to interact with national MPs and other candidates. We certainly have no intention to make any change.
Well, those seen as security threats are a teeny percentage of the voting population. As we saw with the parliamentary occupation, these relatively small fringe groups can cause major disruptions, and the increasingly violent threats against politicians may mean they become less accessible, spelling the end of the campaign of yesteryear. Jenna Lynch, Newshub.
For more on this, we're joined by Lance Burdett, who provided security to Helen Clark when she was Prime Minister. Hi there, Lance. Thanks very much for coming on with us tonight.
Pleasure.
You have worked in assessing risk for VIP, so how has the risk changed recently?
Well, it really happened in the last few years, but more so in the last 2 years. Since, particularly since COVID arrived, people have been locked down. There's been money issues, there's all sorts of things going on, there's mental health problems, lots of distress and stress in the community, and because of that there's a reaction to it. And I think people are just sort of biting back a little bit now, and the risk has got considerable for our politicians.
OK, so what other influences are at play here? You think people might be angrier, but are they also emboldened by what they've seen overseas, the reactions there?
Well, the reactions that are happening overseas are a phenomenon that's happening through the world, where countries have used lockdown as a means of controlling the spread of the virus. The countries that were locked down the longest had the most amount of violence, and it's increased by at least 30%. I think it's up around 35% now. And it's when the people are locked down and when the brain goes into a stress state, what's happening now is the emotions are coming out, the frustrations are coming out. People are just angry and anxious and trying to settle into this new world. You know, we've tried to go back to the way it was, we can't. And really, it's just a melting pot of this. So if you study it around the world, it's happening in all countries where lockdown has been used to a greater or lesser degree.
Now, in this country, the walkabout, of course, is an iconic part of political campaigning here. Would you be advising politicians against them?
Well, at the moment, yes. It's better off to hold those meetings in a hall where it can be, it's easier. I mean, it's a difficult thing for a protection officer, particularly for the Prime Minister, and now I see perhaps the Deputy Prime Minister, to be out and about and walking it, your head's on a swivel, and it's extremely hard to do. So if it's inside a fixed facility, it's a lot easier. Then you can have perhaps a few more police around, uniformed security, some other means of controlling that. But just walking through, as you've seen, in previous times with dignitaries, people have thrown things at them or hurled abuse or whatever. It's so difficult to see. You're on edge the whole time. So if it can be those sorts of things, public meetings are probably a safer means at the moment.
OK, Lance, thanks very much for your time tonight.
Pleasure.